Right, we're going to get started this evening. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Caron Blau-Rothstein. I am the Chief Planning and Engagement Officer of the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland. And we're so excited that you've joined us this evening. Since we conducted our community study in 2023, we learned that one of the things that people are really interested in is enhancing their Jewish literacy. And we also learned that a lot of people do Jewish in their homes. And so what better way to merge those two things than in offering a workshop about how to host a Seder with your family and friends and extended families. And so we're delighted to provide this offering to you. And I'm going to turn it over to the very capable hands of our new Director of Jewish Life and Learning, Dr. Yosef Rosen, in terms of just housekeeping. We ask that you guys keep yourselves on mute until we're ready for question and answers, or if Yosef has some interactive sections. And if, like me, you can't remember your questions for more than a few minutes, please feel free to put them in the chat. And when we have that opportunity for Q&A, we will go over those things. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Yosef.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. It's an honor to be here. This is actually going to be my first Passover ever in Portland, Oregon, so I'm especially excited to be here. I moved here about a year ago, but we were with my family last year in New Jersey, and I am hosting a Seder, probably just like all of you if you are here. And I'm trying something new this year. We have a 2.5-year-old whose bedtime is 8 o'clock coming up soon. And so we figured we're going to try to do 2 Seders. We're going to do a child-friendly kid Seder from in the early hours, and then we're having adults over for a little bit later of a Seder. And that's one of the topics I want us to think about is designing your Seder for the audience that you're going to be having at your home. So I'm going to share a slide deck and share some themes and histories and how-tos around the Seder, and that'll be the main presentation. We'll then briefly look at some aspects of the Haggadah, the script of leading a Seder, and then we'll have time for Q&A and sharing insights and best practices. Okay, so hosting a Seder. Hosting a Seder is a lot like hosting a Thanksgiving dinner. That's probably the closest cultural analog that we have to hosting a Seder. But it's not really such a good analogy because hosting a Thanksgiving meal only requires preparing the food and table. Right? Maybe you prepare a prompt, what is people grateful for, but there's not that much more involved than baking really nice pies and your favorite Thanksgiving staples. So it's laborious, but it's pretty clear what you're supposed to do. Whereas a Seder is 2 things bound together. It is a meal plus a ritual. The Seder transforms dining, right? The Seder happens in the evening, it's kind of the time of supper, but it transforms an evening dinner party into a multi-layered experience of remembrance, questioning, discussion, and celebration that engages all the participants in a shared journey through history and meaning making. Not something that we necessarily do anytime else in the year. Hosting a Seder, therefore, requires preparation beyond food. You're simultaneously planning a ritual ceremony and a festive meal. And so I'm starting with this not to freak you out. Oh my gosh, not only do I have to prepare a full dinner for everyone, but I also have to prepare a ritual ceremony. But just to get us to realize that hosting a Seder is not so simple. And that's why we're having a webinar of how to, because it's not that easy. But thankfully, we are not the first generation to host a Seder. And not only can we learn from previous generations, but the previous generations literally created a script, a guidebook for how to host a Seder. So we don't have to invent the wheel from scratch. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the props, the skills that are needed to host a Seder. And so I just want to orient us by thinking of the Passover Seder in contrast to what for most people is the iconic Jewish event, a Yom Kippur service. When contemporary American Jews are surveyed, that is still the main thing that many Jews do that is like their Jewish participation. Even if they don't do much Jewish during the year, once a year in Yom Kippur, you go to synagogue. And it is such a different thing than hosting a Seder. And you know what? Number two is hosting a Passover Seder. But they're very different. A Yom Kippur service is top down. It is led by a rabbi or cantors. The Passover Seder is DIY. It's led by people like ourselves. It's probably the most elaborate Jewish ritual that is not led by Jewish professionals. The Yom Kippur service requires high quality control, right? You need people who are skilled, who know how to lead the whole service, who know how to give a good sermon, who know how to lead the songs. Passover Seder is lay led. Whoever is here is good enough. We lead the Seder, we do it ourselves. Yom Kippur service is institutional. It's in the synagogue. It's in a big building. The Passover Seder is participatory. It's home-based. Yom Kippur service is big crowd. How many people did we get inside our doors this Yom Kippur? Passover Seder is intimate. If it's 3 people, if it's 4 people, if it's 10 people, it's beautiful, it's perfect. And so in that sense, the Passover Seder has always represented a unique form of Jewish gathering and Jewish ritual that I think really speaks to our moment today. When yes, we may enjoy going to synagogue, going to have these big communal cultural moments. But so much of our Jewish life today is DIY, it's lay-led, it's home-based. And the Seder really presents us with a history and model of Jews doing that generation after generation. So we're going to start off with just a little history. Don't worry, it's not going to be a history lecture, but I think it's really helpful to understand the origins of the Seder to help us understand what is the Seder and how we want to play with it and redesign it today. Okay, so in the Torah, there actually is no Seder. It is not something that ancient Jews did. After the Exodus from Egypt, the Torah instructs future generations of the Israelites to reenact the night of the Exodus by slaughtering a Paschal lamb, to eat it with matzot and maror. Maror is a bitter herb, and to sprinkle some blood on the doorpost. So to reenact the ritual generation after generation, just like they did on the eve of the Exodus from Egypt. It also instructs the father to teach his son about the Exodus on Pesach. And on the right-hand side, I brought the verses from Exodus. And you shall keep this thing as a ritual for you and your children everlasting. And so when you come to the land of Israel, that your Lord will give you as he has spoken, you shall keep this service. Right? That when something profound happens to our ancestors, they wanted future generations to commemorate it. And so your sons should ask you, what is this service to you? You shall say, a Passover sacrifice to the Lord who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he scourged Egypt and our households he rescued. Okay, so for generations, the Passover Seder really was about a lamb sacrifice. The Israelites would make pilgrimage to the Jerusalem temple. They would offer a paschal sacrifice. They would come together with their whole families. You had to eat the whole lamb in one night. So imagine how hard that is. That's like an opportunity to invite as many cousins as you can so that you can finish that darn lamb before dawn breaks. So that was the original Seder. There was no storytelling. There was none of the things that we're used to. But then something happened. The temple was destroyed in the year 70, 2,000 years ago. And once the temple was destroyed, no longer could you bring that paschal lamb sacrifice. And so Jews were no longer able to reenact that key ritual that the Israelites did in Egypt. And it was the center of the Passover ritual. So all of a sudden, Jews were at a loss. What are we supposed to do on Passover? Our old ways are no longer possible. The rabbis, this new style of Jewish leadership that emerged in the wake of the demise of the priestly class in the Second Temple, they designed a brand new ritual. One that would center the same themes of matzah, maror, and the lamb, but also create a ceremony that would focus on intergenerational storytelling. So they took those same motifs that are here of, when your child asks you, what's this about? You tell them the story, and it's about the matzah, the maror, and the lamb. They kept that, but they had to create a whole new ritual for it. And the way that they created a new ritual was they looked around. These are rabbis who were living in the ancient Israel. And what was the culture at that time? It was Greco-Roman. And what did Greco-Romans do when they wanted to have a big celebratory feast that had meaning making and storytelling? They would host a symposium. Look at the picture on the right-hand side. it doesn't look that different necessarily than a Seder. There are people reclining, they're drinking a lot of wine, they're eating food, they're talking. The Greek symposium was an aristocratic activity, a tightly choreographed social gathering where men drank together, conversed, and enjoyed themselves in a convivial atmosphere. Participants reclined, one or two to a couch, and drank lots of wine, and conversed often about specific topics, recited poetry or played music. Jokes, gossip, and games of skill and balance enlivened the evening, as did professional musicians and dancers. This is a quote from the Smithsonian website. The well-conducted symposium was a center for the transmission of traditional values, as well as an event that provided liberation from everyday restraints within a carefully regulated environment. So the rabbis tasked with creating a brand new ritual were like, oh, you know what? The communities around us are already doing something really profound, which is they're coming together, they're transmitting their culture, they're teaching each other, but they're doing it in this relaxed, joyous way. Let's do something like that. And so David Golinkin, a conservative rabbi and scholar, observes in his article, The Origins of the Seder, that the sages absorbed the form of the symposium from the Hellenistic world, but drastically changed its content. The Greeks and Romans discussed love, beauty, food, and drink at the symposium, while the sages at the Seder, those rabbis, discussed the exodus from Egypt, the miracles of God and the greatness of the redemption. The symposium was meant for the elite, while the sages turned the Seder into educational experience for the entire Jewish people. But was it really for the entire Jewish people? Was it also for children? The symposium is an adult-only event, and it was a male-only event. The Seder is all of a sudden a family-centered ritual for men and women. And it took into account and focused primarily on children in a way that the symposium did not. And this is the last history slide. I promise this won't be a boring history lecture, but I think this is important for understanding what the Seder is about. The Mishnah, which is the first Jewish text that teaches us about this new ritual that the rabbis had just designed called the Seder, when it gets to the moment, the classical moment of the children asking the Manishta questions, and again, right, it invented that moment, this is how it describes that. They poured the second cup of wine. And here the son asks his father the questions about the differences between Passover night and a regular night. And if the son does not have the intelligence to ask questions on his own, so right, if your kid is 2 years old or 5 years old, doesn't yet know how to notice what's different about tonight, his father teaches him the questions. Why is this night different from all the other nights? Manishtana halayla hazeh. And according to the intelligence ability of the children, his father teaches them about the Exodus. So you see already that, yes, it's an adult, oriented event. They're drinking wine, they're telling adult stories, but there's also this key emphasis on, hey, we want our children to notice that this is not something we always do. This is a little different than any other party or holiday celebration we have at our home. Maimonides, 1,000 years later, the great rabbinic sage of North Africa, frames this a little differently. He tells us that the leader of the Seder, that's you guys, should do unusual things on this night so that the children will see and will be motivated to ask, why is this night different from all other nights? Until the host replies to them, this and this occurred in the Exodus and the liberation, this and this took place. What changes should be made? So Maimonides actually gives you a few practical models of this. The host should give the children roasted seeds and nuts. Apparently that wasn't something that people usually did at dinner. The table should be taken away before they eat. So everyone's sitting around the table. All of a sudden, people move the table and everyone's like, what's going on? And then the parents are like, well, let me tell you, this is not an ordinary dinner. This is a Seder. This commemorates liberation. And furthermore, matzot should be snatched from each other and the like. In other words, create your own ways to get your children to be like, what is happening? This is weird. One of my favorite examples of this, you can see in the image on the right-hand side. This is a Barcelona Haggadah produced around 1350. And it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that the host of the Seder on the far left has placed the Seder plate on someone's head. Another like weird thing, just so then the other children are like, ha ha ha, what's going on? And then they're like, all right, buckle up, I'll tell you. So you can see then, in a sense, that the Seder, from this history, we can see that the Seder has this really unique composition where it's built out of two different things. One is an adult symposium, and the second is children's theater. And that's why I think if you have been to Seders before, you may have noticed that some parts of the Seder feel like very kid-oriented. And maybe if you're an adult, you enjoy it when the kids are involved, but it doesn't really feel like it's speaking to you. And then there are other parts that kids are like, I have no idea what's going on, but not in a way that makes me curious, in a way that feels like this doesn't really invite children in because it was built out of this older model of an adult symposium. So the takeaway that I hope you hear here is that you really have to craft your own Seder and figure out, do I want my Seder to be more adult oriented or do I want it to be more child focused? And the Haggadah offers resources for both of those things. And that's why you can do both. You can have a Seder generation after generation, like in this image, you can see is adults and children. And the Haggadah does offer moments for both, but it also does inspire us to say, hey, if I'm just having a whole bunch of young families, let me cut out the parts of the Haggadah that are really for that adult symposium style. And if I'm just having an adult focus one, maybe I'm not going to do those child things like do weird things so the children will ask the Manashtana. Okay. Here's just another beautiful picture from another Haggadah from Corfu, Greece from 1877. We can just like see these different moments in Jewish history of Jews gathered together, young and old, for the Seder. Okay, so now let's get to the practice, the DIY of hosting a Seder. So we've done a little bit of the history, and we've shown that the history helps us understand that the way that the Haggadah and the Seder itself is meant to be multi-generational, but also kind of creates this tension where some parts of the Seder feel more kid-friendly and some parts feel more adult-friendly. And you have the right, you have the liberty. I'm empowering you to spend time beforehand and figure out who's my audience, which parts of the Haggadah are we going to skip because they're not a good match for my audience. That is totally fine. Again, the Seder is not something given down from God to Moses on Mount Sinai. Okay, so the elements of the Seder. Really, there's two, like I began with. There's food and there's ritual. But also, unlike a Thanksgiving meal, a lot of the food at the Seder is symbolic food. I guess you could say the turkey is somewhat symbolic. Okay, but there's three parts of the food that I think every host of the Seder needs to take into account. The symbolic foods, which we'll talk about next. Dinner itself, you want to have a good dinner. People are in it for a multi-hour experience. You definitely want to feed them. And then appetizers, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Ritual. There's three main components to the ritual. There's the actions of the Haggadah that are very short and specific practical things that are usually really fun. There's the storytelling. At the heart of the Haggadah, at the heart of the Seder, is some element of storytelling, story of liberation. And then there's song. Okay, so we're going to walk through these different aspects. So let's begin with everyone's favorite, food. And let's begin with the Seder plate. So maybe you're super familiar with this, and maybe you've never seen a Seder plate. So we're just going to start basic, but also bring in some more profound wisdom as well. So the Seder plate generally has 6 components to it. So let's just go through them. And each of these things is something that you need to spend a little bit of time either sourcing or preparing. The fresh herbs you just buy, but hard-boiled egg, charoset, the lamb bone, or the chicken bone, you need to prepare these things. Okay, so let's just go through them one by one. Probably the most important one is the maror. There's a whole ritual around it. The maror is a bitter herb. My family, we grew up having both horseradish, which is kind of pretty hardcore. It's like wasabi. Imagine just like downing pieces of wasabi, which is also another fun way to do maror is you can kind of create a little wasabi paste and people can dip something into it. Or sometimes people have romaine lettuce, which is a little bit more palatable. But the point of maror is to literally eat something that is going to make you cry a little bit. That's going to make you be like, whoa, that is a bitter food. That is something that reminds me that throughout Jewish history, people have at times had bitter and painful experiences, and you are embodying that experience. The next most important one is the charoset. Everyone loves a good charoset. There's a million different recipes. There's even a book that came out 2 years ago that's like a history of charoset, which is like a fascinating thing. I'm not going to recommend any one specific style. There's Yemenite style, Moroccan style. but it generally involves apples, dates, and nuts in some configuration. And it creates this like very sweet and delicious paste that is supposed to in some way remind us of the bricks. So if you see on the bottom, on the left-hand side, on the bottom charoset, it is a symbol of the mortar that the slaves used in Egypt, usually a mixture of chopped fruit and nuts. And a current connection mortar is used for buildings, walls that create physical separation. And this is something you need to prepare beforehand. It's kind of fun to prepare. And sometimes when I'm hosting a Seder, I'll invite several of my participants. Hey, do you have a charoset recipe that you love? Prepare it. And then we kind of have like a potluck style of trying everyone's charoset. Then we have the karpas. The karpas is going to, again, have a specific ritual built around it that I'll get to in a moment, where you dip a herb, usually a fresh green vegetable, usually parsley, in salt water. But some people do artichoke, some people do asparagus, green onions. It's really just supposed to be something green that you're going to dip in water. So you want to figure out beforehand, what am I going to use? Did my parents have a tradition? You can ask them. What did you grow up doing? What feels fun? Maybe mix it up, maybe have more than one. Then you have the beitzah, a hard-boiled egg. Usually it's not cut in half like this. I think that's just there to help you see that it's an egg. Usually it's just a full hard-boiled egg. And here it says that it is a symbol of the festival offering. A roasted egg celebrates spring, renewal, and rejuvenation. And that's quite common on the Seder plate. And then we have the zroa. So growing up, we never did lamb. It was always just a piece of chicken. I have one brother and 5 sisters, and it was always a competition between my brother and I who got to roast this piece of chicken, because you would like hold it with tongs above the fire. It was kind of exciting. You wanted it to have like this charred feeling. But certainly if you're a red meat eater, you can use a shank bone of lamb to commemorate the Paschal lamb at Passover. And then finally, you have the chazeret, the bitter vegetable. Usually it is romaine lettuce. So you have these different foods that you need to either buy or prepare. That kind of is like a nice plate of spring foods, right? A lot of the greenery of it. And maybe consider making everyone their own personal Seder plate with everything they will need to complete the Seder rituals on a smaller salad plate. So one thing generally you might want to do is, first of all, create place settings for each person with a little name card. So everyone that comes in is like, oh, my host thought about that I'm coming, and they put some intention of sitting me here next to this person. And then by every, at least adult, but also perhaps for children of a certain age, they could have their own little plate with the hard-boiled egg, the karpas, the charoset, and the maror. They don't need the lamb bone because that's not something we actually eat. But the other 4 elements we do eat throughout the Seder. And so it's kind of nice for everyone to have their own private little plate, and it kind of spruces up and decorates the Seder table as you're preparing it. Okay, so that's the ritual foods. Now we're going to very briefly go through the choreography of the Seder. Famously, the Seder is called a Seder because the word Seder means structure. Rather than just have a free-for-all dinner, the Seder has steps to it, which make it fun. It's like, okay, we're up step 2. Okay, now I know what's coming, step 3. There's even a tradition in the beginning to sing a song of the different stages. And tomorrow morning, I will share an email to each of you with the slide deck, with the recording, and with added resources, including a playlist that will have some of these songs as well. So let's just go through this. Again, maybe you're super familiar with this. Maybe this is brand new, but it's always good to refresh our memory. And as I'm speaking, you might want to be taking notes of like, which one of these things do I know easy how to do it? And which one of these am I going to need to do a little bit more of research and prep and figure out how do I want to do this? Okay, so the order of the Seder. Number 1, wine. We generally drink a lot of wine at the Seder. I personally do not drink wine. It is not good for my body. So I figured out, but what do I want to do? I want to be able to drink something that looks like wine. So every year I boil hibiscus tea for myself. It's a nice dark red. I drink 4 cups of hibiscus tea. Some people drink grape juice. I don't do well with sugar, but you definitely want to have something that you're going to drink 4 nice cups of. And so like all Jewish meals, we start off with a cup of wine and the Kiddush blessing. The second stage is urchatz, where we wash our hands. And there's a really unique way that this is done at the Seder, whereas instead of at a normal Jewish gathering, if people are going to wash their hands before the breaking of bread, usually everyone leaves the dining room, goes to the kitchen or the bathroom and washes their hands. There is a very common throughout Jewish communities that on the Seder night, someone, the host or someone else, will walk around with a bowl of water and a cup and a towel and wash your hands for you. And the reason that's done is because one of the main purposes of the Seder is to ensure that every guest feels like they are liberated, like they are a free person. We are celebrating Jewish liberation. And to feel liberated is to have someone come over to you and clean your hands, right? The person doing it is not your servant, it's a friend, but it's like that feeling of, wow, I'm being honored, I'm being recognized, right? And that's also why we recline, to have that sense of liberation and luxury. So that's something that I really recommend, is wash people's hands. It's a really nice thing to do. Number 3, here we come to the first item from the Seder plate, the karpas. So remember, going back to our Seder plate, the karpas is over here, green herb or vegetable such as parsley, and it is dipped in salt water. So as you're preparing your Seder plate, not only do you need to prepare these different foods, but you're also going to need lots of little bowls of salt water. And you want to make sure that it's really salty, which is hard to do if you prepare it beforehand. The salt will sit at the bottom. So usually beforehand, you'll want to like give it a mix beforehand, but you really want that when people dip that herb in the water and they taste it, they're getting a nice salty bite. And I'll mention at this point, if you notice, dinner isn't till all the way number 11. And that could be a while. Okay, if you do all these stages, it could be 2 hours, 3 hours, even if it's 45 minutes. People sit down at a table, they're expecting food. Instead, what are they getting? A bunch of bitter herbs dipped in salt. They're going to be hungry. They're going to be cranky. So a really nice thing to do is to produce a whole kind of spread of sliced veggies and nice dips that people can munch on throughout the Seder. The motif of dipping is a big motif on the Seder night. One of the 4 questions of the Manashtana is, why do we dip so much on Passover? And so you can accentuate that and provide even more appetizers throughout the Seder. So I really recommend that. You don't want people munching on matzah before we get to the matzah part. So give people nice little snacks so that they feel grounded and ready to be present for the ritual and the conversation. And they're not like, where's the brisket? Okay. Number 4, yachatz. This is a very quick one. You literally just take one of the matzahs and you break it in half. The reason you break it in half is because you're saving half of it for step number towards the end. At the end of the meal, you're going to eat part of that broken matzah because we want matzah to be the last thing that you taste in the evening. There's a principle in the Haggadah that we don't eat afikomen. Afikomen is another Greek word, comes from the symposium context, that means dessert. And so we don't want you eating dessert at the end of the meal. Now, of course, you can serve dessert. And the ways that Jews have solved this, Jews want to have a nice dessert, is we're going to serve dessert, don't worry. But after the dessert, we're going to eat a little bit more of matzah so that the matzah then concludes the meal. And the matzah that you eat at the end of the meal is the afikomen. There's many traditions about the afikomen. Growing up, you can see here in the bottom left, it's connected to the one of tzafun. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but it's connected to yachatz. The afikomen is found. So there is a very fun tradition. Again, this is one of the ways that we make the Seder fun for children, is that the host, while everyone's kind of moving around or doing fun things, after you've broken the matzah in half, takes one half of the matzah, puts it in a bag so it doesn't crumble, and you go and hide it somewhere in the house. Then whenever the kids get bored and you say, okay, time for you guys to go find the afikomen, and whoever finds it gets a prize. Growing up with 5 sisters and a brother, it was very competitive who was going to find the afikomen. And then when you get the afikomen, you bargain, because the host needs that afikomen. They need the last bite of the Seder to be the afikomen. So whoever has that afikomen can really bargain for a nice little gift to remember Passover with. Okay, so that is Yachatz, breaking of the matzah. Again, these are very quick. The Kaddish is going to take you 2 minutes to make the blessing. Washing the hands might take a few minutes because everyone needs time to have their hands washed. Dipping of the vegetable, very quick. Breaking the matzah, very quick. So we go fast, fast, fast. But then we get to Magid. And Magid is really the thing that is both the heart of the Seder, but sometimes can really drag a Seder out. And so Magid is the one thing that as hosts, you really need to do some prep beforehand. And so after I finish my slide deck, we'll look at one version of Magid, and we'll kind of think about which of these components do you want to bring into your Seder, because the Magid is long. It's a lot of reading of text. Some of it's more captivating, some of it's not captivating, but it's the heart of the Seder because that's when we tell the story. And there is no such thing as a Seder without some element of storytelling, the storytelling of liberation. Okay, so we'll come back to Magid. Rachza. After Magid, you wash your hands again because now you're going to eat the matzah. Motzi matzah is the time for everyone to eat matzah. Traditionally, it's not just to have a little nibble of matzah. It's like to have a big chunk of matzah. And one of my favorite traditions about matzah is that you don't eat matzah in the days before Passover, so that this moment is like, oh, finally I get to taste this matzah. And you really focus, you meditate on it, its texture, its blandness, the fact that this is supposed to represent the poor man's bread, the bread that our ancestors ate when they were slaves, when they didn't have time to make real bread. And it connects you to that legacy, to that ancestral history. So again, rachza, quick. Motzi matzah, it's fast. Everyone's eating matzah. Maybe it takes a minute, 2 minutes. Maror, again, another fast one. This is, you're going back to your Seder plate, and now it's time to eat that bitter herb, that horseradish, the romaine lettuce, whatever it is you're using. You pass it around, or if you designed your table so that everyone already has their own Seder plate, everyone can just grab whatever it is. Obviously, if you're doing horseradish, you don't want to just give a full piece of horseradish. You want to use a vegetable peeler and shave little pieces off that are more easy to eat. It is fun. I do recommend it, right? It kind of gives people something edgy to do, and it kind of makes like a fun scene of like, who could eat the horseradish, and people's experience of that. Although it's obviously not supposed to be fun, but it's supposed to be interactive. Okay, then we get to one of my favorite parts, korech, which is sandwich making, where you take 2 pieces of matzah, maror, and charoset. And this is really the first time in the Seder that you're eating the charoset, which is that apple and nut paste that you make. And so you're making this really cool sandwich of matzah, something sweet and something bitter, to really represent the balance in Judaism between bitter memories and sweet memories. And then finally, it's dinner. And so again, notice that aside from the Magid, you have this choreography, really that's like a script, a theater, of doing these short rituals with almost every single one of them involves food or water. They're very embodied, they're very tactile, and it's very focused on your palate. And that's why I think they've been so popular over generations, because they're really accessible. You don't really need to know what's going on to have a profound experience of it. But of course, you can add layers of meaning and explaining what these things are about. Finally, we get to dinner, Shulchan Aruch. And generally, I would say that's kind of when I would guess that probably 80 to 90% of American Jews end their Seder there with dinner. But I will tell you, there are 3 more sections in the Haggadah. Tzafun, that's when you eat the piece of the afikomen, and it is a nice ritual of coming back to the matzah at the very end of dinner. Barech, which is the grace after meals. And then there's these 2 sections that don't get enough honor, but they're quite fun, and that's the song time. There's lots of really cool Passover songs that are not Dayenu, they're less famous, but they're really fun, they're really interesting. And so, if you want to put a little prep into that, into having some traditional Passover songs, you probably want to spend a little time with the Haggadah, maybe find one that you can find on YouTube or Spotify. You can share out some songs in an email to your guests beforehand and say, hey, everyone, practice these 2 songs. We're going to sing them together. One of the most famous one is Chad Gadya, which is a really fun story about a lamb that gets into a lot of trouble. Okay, so that's the Seder. So again, the main thing to remember is that you're going to have a guide that's going to tell you exactly what to do. And so for most of the Seder, you don't need to do that much prep in terms of the ritual. You just need to prep the food items, except for Magid. Magid is the one thing that you really do need to put some thought into how you want to guide people through Magid. So that's why we're going to focus on Magid in a minute. But let me just close this out by thinking about the Seder as edible theater. It's theater. It's meant to captivate and transport people into an experience of exodus, of liberation, of slavery, of Egypt, of moments of despair and redemption throughout Jewish history. And it's really based around food, right? You can't have a Seder without all those different symbolic food items and without a good meal. But think about yourself, the host, as the director. You're the director of your Seder. You have the props, which are the Seder food, and you have the script, the Haggadah. Now it's your job to figure out your style and your adaptation, right? Imagine that you are a director who is now doing another version of Hamlet, right? You don't just want to do like what everyone else did. You want to figure out what's your voice, what's important to you. And so, yes, we have this script, we have these food items, but how do you want to make it your own? And there's so much space for that. Generation after generation, Jews have made the Seder their own. And that's been especially true, I think, in America in the 20th and 21st century, where Jews have felt liberated to redesign the Haggadah, to add new food items to the Seder plate that feel like they speak to things that are that are relevant to their own stories of liberation worldwide. And of course, to figure out your style and your adaptation, you need to know your audience. If your audience is people who've never been to a Seder, you're probably going to want to craft your Seder differently than if people who've been to 40 Seders year after year and are going to know right away what to do. So what are some ways to customize your Seder? Excuse me. So this is from the PJ Library Family Haggadah, which I'm going to highly recommend. It is available for free download as a PDF. You can also purchase it on Amazon for like $8 or whichever Jewish bookstore you want to patronize. So we'll look at the Haggadah in a minute. I just wanted to lift this page out because it's relevant to what we're talking about now. Customizing your Seder. So of course, the most basic way to customize your Seder, I think, has to do with the Magid, which we'll get to in a moment. Which parts of that story are you going to emphasize? But besides for that, here is a few other ways. Decorate. Bring art into your Seder, right? The Seder doesn't just need to be eating food and words. It can also involve people doing things like making art, especially if you have kids. There's lots of really fun art projects that you can do at the Seder that are going to keep the children occupied and they're going to be doing something that's fun, that's engaging. And you know what? Art's good for adults too. Make a special cup of wine, a decorated cloth to wrap the matzah. These are projects that if you have children, you could do before the Seder or during the Seder. Add drama. Bring costumes or props to the table to encourage both adults and kids to get into the act. The Seder is theater. There are many traditions, especially amongst Sephardi Jews, that literally they reenact the story of the Exodus. They'll stand up, they'll walk around the table, people will dress up as Moses, as Pharaoh, and reenact the story. You don't just all have to be sitting down for 3 hours. It can get a little tedious, it can get a little boring. So if you're someone who likes drama, who likes plays, write up a little script. I'm sure you can find nice ones online. And bring some drama into your Seder. Very important, bring your own stories. Do any of your friends or family members have a freedom story to tell? Bring images or objects from their experience to help show how in every generation we experience the journey to freedom. Consider inviting others to prepare some of these ahead of time too. Snacks of all ages, we kind of talked about that already. Connect to the present and sing out. Freedom songs in any language your family knows can enrich the celebration section of the Seder. And so big picture, you really want to make your Seder not just custom to what's important to you, but you also really want to make your Seder participatory and interactive. You want your guests to feel like they're not just sitting there and they're watching a play. And also, that's a lot on you as the Seder host to like do everything. Like we began with, it can be a lot to host a Seder. And so the more you make it participatory, your job's a little bit easier. So here's a few things you could do before the Seder and during the Seder. Before the Seder, send prep materials. And this one I highly, highly recommend. Email guests beforehand with specific readings, questions, or topics to prepare in advance. Let's say you're having 10 guests. Assign to guest number one, you are going to do 3 minutes of research about karpas, and you're going to guide us in what is this ritual about. This person's going to do the dayenu. Tell us, what is this dayenu about? How does it connect to our lives? Lots of ways to have people prepare something instead of just doing a potluck where people are bringing food. This way people are bringing some wisdom, some foresight and prep. And I think people really appreciate this. I don't think guests are going to feel taxed if you give them a small assignment. They're going to feel like, oh, I get to be part of the Seder, not just a guest. Ask for contributions. Invite guests to bring a symbolic object that represents freedom to them. And then they tell a story about it. Just like we have all those traditional Jewish items on the table, have them bring something that maybe is important to them from their life story, a picture or an object. Create custom roles. Assign different parts of the Haggadah to specific guests based on their interest or talents, right? So this is similar to the send prep materials. Is there someone in your group who's a great song leader? Is there someone who's like very drama theater person? What are people's talents? How could you incorporate that into the Seder? Collect family stories. Ask people to gather personal exotic narratives from attendees to weave into the Seder. What are their stories of migration? What are people's ancestral stories of persecution and liberation? How can they weave in their own personal stories into the Seder? Seder doesn't just have to be, here's what happened in the time of Moses and the Israelites, but how does that story recur over and over again? So that's before the Seder. During the Seder, here's a couple of things. Round robin readings. I think most people do this, but in case you don't do it, highly recommend it. Instead of one leader, right? Instead of one person doing all the talking especially during the Magid, the storytelling section, pass leadership around the table for different sections. You're going to lead this, you're going to do that. Of course, that's easier if you had emailed people beforehand or called them, text them, let them know, hey, I would love for you not just to read this, but to also put some thought into it so that you can share some wisdom of your own around this topic. Discussion prompts. Place thought-provoking questions under plates or cups to spark conversation. Maybe under those Seder plates, you have a couple of little question prompts that are going to make the Seder personal and meaningful. Personal connections. After each ritual element, invite guests to share how it relates to their life. Modern parallels. Ask different guests to connect parts of the Exodus story to current events. Rotating interpretation. Have each person offered their understanding of different symbols. Growing up in a large family, our Seder took forever because each one of us came back from Jewish day school with 20 different things that we had learned that we all wanted to share. And so we would go around the table, one kid at a time. You got to share. Okay, now we read another section. Okay, now it's my sister's turn. So that way everyone got to bring in their own interpretation. And collaborative storytelling. Begin the Exodus story and have each person add a detail or perspective. I've done this, and it's actually quite fun. It kind of depends on people having some good familiarity with the Exodus story, although it can be more fun if people don't, right? Where one person says, the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. And then the next person adds 2 sentences. The next person adds 2 sentences. And you know what? People can riff on it and make it funny and make it involve people's enslavement to social media and make it 21st century and kind of come up with this like fun group storytelling that brings the story in new directions. So that is a very quick run through of some of the things you might want to be thinking about as you prepare for the Seder. And I'm going to spend now 10-ish minutes, maybe a little bit less, just looking with you at the PJ Library Haggadah at their Magid. Because one thing that they did was, if you look at a traditional, like a Maxwell Haggadah, you'll see that the Magid is quite long and it has a lot of stuff in it. And honestly, about a third of it really should have been cut a long time ago. A lot of it is midrash, which means interpretation of verses. And it's not storytelling. It's not really conducive to an interactive, engaging Seder. So the PG Library Haggadah did a nice job of filtering that stuff out and just getting to the heart of the Haggadah. So I'll just skim through it, some of it. So it goes through the different rituals we talked about. It gives you a nice guide of how to do it in case people might not know how to do it. Well, let me just start. Let me back up a second. Haggadahs. I should have mentioned this. Set the share for a second. Given that the Haggadah is really every person at the Seder, their personal playbill, you want to put some intention into what Haggadah are people going to have. And there's two ways to do this. One is every person has the same exact Haggadah, which means pre-purchasing, or I guess having people, sending them, hey, will you make sure that you source this Haggadah? And yes, Simon, I will send an email out tomorrow morning with the slide deck and with everything. So one way is to have everyone have the same Haggadah. That way everyone is kind of on the same page, literally. I prefer and recommend a different, which is have people bring their own Haggadah, one that they like. Empower people to say, if you don't have a Haggadah, go find one that you find interesting. There are a million of them. You just go to any bookstore, you will find lots of them. You go online. There's even a wonderful website that I'll share a link to tomorrow where you can customize your own Haggadah. So that's nice because then people are still going to have the main structure be the same, but they're going to have different interpretations, different cool artworks that they can share. And it lets people then say, oh, my Haggadah has a really cool take on what the Charoset is all about. So it gives people more material to work with. So again, you might want to put some thought into that, but certainly you want to make sure that every guest at your Seder is going to have a Haggadah. You don't want to have 12 guests show up and, oh my gosh, no one brought a Haggadah. I only have 3 Haggadahs. What are we going to do now? So that's definitely something you want to avoid. So either tell people beforehand, bring your favorite Haggadah, or purchase beforehand Haggadahs. Even if you purchase them yourself, you can purchase 12 different ones. Every year, there's people do nice write-ups of like all the new Haggadahs. I think probably like over 50 Haggadahs. New Haggadahs are printed every single year. It is the biggest area of Jewish publishing. So there's no dearth of new cool Haggadahs. Okay, so let's go back to the PJ Library Haggadah. Of course, the PJ Library Haggadah is child-oriented. So if your Seder is not going to have any children, it might not be the best, but honestly, I think it might still be great because they've really made it bare bones and given space for you to add your own elements. Okay, so here's Maggid. So it is the longest part of the Haggadah when we tell the story of how the Jewish people became slaves in Egypt and then became free. As part of the telling, we ask questions, invite discussion, experience the story with acting and singing. So I'm not going to read the whole section. I'm just going to show you what the different parts of the Maggid are. Okay, so the first part is a section that is about the matzah. It's called Halach Ma'anya. And if you get it as a PDF, you can click on these things and it'll send you to a nice little YouTube video of someone chanting it with a melody, with a traditional melody. The tradition is you stand up, you hold the matzah plate, and you recite this section. Then you begin to talk about our moment now. And when we're connected to our ancestral story of slavery, you then refill your cup of wine. So there's 4 cups of wine throughout the Seder. Your Haggadah will tell you when it's time to pour the cup, when it's time to drink the cup. We then right away, Manishtana, it's time for the kids to ask the questions. Even if there's no kids, you still ask the questions. There's even a tradition, even if you're all alone, you're still supposed to ask the questions. One teaching I heard that has stayed with me is, why is the Haggadah so invested in questioning? Because questioning is the art of liberation. A slave is not someone who has the ability to ask questions, right? They just have to do what they are told. Beginning your process of liberation is questioning the status quo, is asking why do things have to be like this? Couldn't we imagine a different reality? And so perhaps questions are so central to the Haggadah and the Passover Seder because to ask a question is the first step of liberation. So we have the Manishtana, the 4 questions. We then have the 4 children, right after the 4 questions, the 4 children, which is really about 4 different styles of pedagogy, which is all about crafting your Seder to be specific and focused to who your audience is. So if you have a child that has gone to day school their whole life and knows a lot about Passover, you're going to want to teach them something different than if your child is someone who has never encountered Passover before. And of course, this is not just for children, but it's for all people. So if you've got some rebellious children, some simple children, wise children, of course, we all have some of that component within ourselves. And so then there's the Maggid will tell us, how should you craft your Seder to these different audiences? So you can see the Haggadah itself was already saying, hey, tailor your storytelling, know who's in your audience. The more storytelling, the better. This is the moment when you can add your own details to the Passover story, make up the story. What are some stories of liberation? What are some stories of people who are still enslaved in the 21st century? There are people nowadays who still are slaves. It is not an antiquated thing. Then it begins the Haggadah's version of the story. Our ancestors wandered from Mesopotamia, and it begins this whole story of how did the Israelites get to Egypt? So this is, if you just want to read the Haggadah, but the PG Library also gives you these little prompt questions to take a moment to pause. You want to find a nice cadence when you're hosting a Seder between reading the Haggadah and, okay, let's put our Haggadahs down and let's have a conversation about this. And again, know your audience. Are there parents that are, have crying kids? You may not have so much time to really have a really deep conversation. But if everyone's there and excited to talk about meaningful things, it's a great time to do that. So, and then you get to the 10 plagues. This is a very kid-friendly part where when you say the name of the 10 plagues, each time you dip a little bit of wine to say, even when those who have persecuted us have been destroyed or struck down, we still feel a little bit of sadness when that happens. And so we commemorate that with that ritual. Here's a prompt to act things out. And then Dayenu. My 2-year-old son has been walking around all day today singing Dayenu, which made me very happy. It's a wonderful song, and it's really about it is more than enough, that God has given us more than enough. And throughout our Jewish history, we've had many moments of redemption and being given gifts. And then the most important part. So really, I would say at the heart of the Maggid is two things. Number one, telling the story of the Exodus in whatever form you want. Okay, for that children's Seder that I'm going to do, I think we might show 20 minutes of the Prince of Egypt, just as a way of being like, my kid is 2 years old. There's no way to really involve him in storytelling, but he'll enjoy 20 minutes of the Prince of Egypt. Okay, do it in your own way. How do you want to tell the story of the liberation from Exodus? The second most important part is to tell a little bit about what the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror are all about. The Pesach means the Paschal lamb that was originally the ritual of the Seder. The matzah is the flatbread, and the maror is the bitter herb. And that's a very important part of the Maggid. Before you get to the ritual of eating the matzah, of eating the maror, of eating the sandwich, to talk a little bit about what these things are. And so that's this section. And then what do you know? You're done. Time for eating those special items, having another cup of wine, and moving on to dinner. So in that bare bones fashion, it could be 45 minutes. I think if your Maggid takes less than 20 minutes, you probably want to expand it, breathe a little bit more life in it. Of course, this all depends on who your audience is. But again, if you're offering people appetizers beforehand, people are well fed, if people are excited about having nice, meaningful conversation, let your Maggid breathe. An hour, 45 minutes is a nice amount of time for people to feel like they came to an experience that was more than just a dinner. They came to something that was uniquely Jewish. They came to a Passover Seder. And that's what really makes the Seder a uniquely Passover specific event. So hopefully you're taking away a little bit of how to lead a Seder, some practical things, some historical context of what the Seder, where it came from, a sense of what are some tips for how to make it participatory and interactive, and how to make it exciting, how to make it 21st century, right? The point of the Seder is to feel in every single generation that this is something that we are reliving. That's why we eat the objects. That's why we tell the story. We don't want to feel like this is just something that happened 3,000 years ago. So what are the ways that it connects to our moment today? And I'll just end by saying that many Jews throughout the world, there have now been this will be the second Passover since October 7th. And Jews have created various ways of honoring, commemorating the fact that many Jews are not able to be home for Passover, either because they are still captives in Gaza or because they have been killed in the last 2 years in the different contexts that happened. And so I'm not going to recommend one thing to do. Definitely, some people keep empty chairs at the table to commemorate the hostages who are still hostages today. But I will just note that this is not the first moment in which Jews celebrated Passover, created meaningful seders when they were not feeling like, wow, I'm fully liberated. Jews are doing great. Okay. In World War II, Jews celebrated the Seder. Throughout Jewish history, in times of persecution, Jews celebrated the Seder. And it's a beacon of light. It's a moment to remember liberation and to center what is the liberation that we're seeking today? What are the ways that the Jewish people still requires new stages of liberation? And what are the ways that Jews can contribute to global liberation as well? So I'll end my share. 8 o'clock. Now's a good time to have a little open floor. If folks ask questions in the chat or want to offer either things that you do, that you grew up doing, that you feel like really, really have been exciting and work for you that you want everyone to know about, or questions that I didn't discuss, I'd love to hear your thoughts and insights and questions. So the floor is yours for now. Karan, was there anything you wanted to share before that?
Yeah, no, just I'm gonna go to your question while people are thinking about things that they want to share, questions they have for you, Yosef, although that was a very comprehensive introduction to the kinds of things you can do to enhance your Seder. Thank you so much. We were at a Seder last year, an intergenerational one with family that have, as Yosef alluded to, different experiences or interactions with Judaism, and some people from dual heritage households. And we got up and did a play. And we literally had a 4-year-old kid in a laundry basket as if he was Moses, coming down and being sent in his Moses basket by his sister Miriam into Pharaoh's household. And I think that really, it got everybody up from the table, it got everybody up moving, and it made it very concrete for the child, who I felt like we were all there to help that child learn. It's probably the first year that young person will remember, I think, the experience. And I certainly think that he will remember being in the Moses laundry basket. But I think even as adults, we all enjoyed participating in that, and it was very dramatic. And it was really fun. And so sometimes you can get up from the table. You don't even have to, do things at the table. And I think that really broke up the evening, and certainly was much more fun for a 4-year-old than sitting at a table listening to a bunch of adults read, without something to break it up. So that's just one thing I want to share that we've done with our extended family.
Totally. Yeah. And I love like learning about other Jewish, not others, not the right word, but Ashkenazi, so other Jewish cultures, and the ways that their Seder sometimes look very different than the way that I grew up. There's I forget which Jewish community, they like take the maror and they like whack each other on the back with it, as like to commemorate slavery. I saw on one of the websites that offers custom seders, they had like a chat GPT seder, which was interesting and cute. But I thought like, it could be, you could use AI in interesting ways. Like, let's say your kids are really into, I don't know, they're really into like, what's a good example? I don't know. They're really into Sesame Street if kids are still into that. Like, you just ask ChatGPT, like, hey, take the Exodus story and write me out a nice little play that like includes the Sesame Street characters. There's like, it's ways to like outsource a little bit of creativity that could be complicated, and you have lots of other things to think about. So just throwing that out there, that it's good things to learn from other Jewish cultures. And along the way, if you want to use a little chat GPT, everyone will find that entertaining as well. All right, any questions?
They're all planning their Seder. They just started cleaning while we were right at the end. They're all like ready to dash away and clean and buy those Haggadah. And by the way, a lot of them are downloadable that you'll find on the Passover resource page. So you don't need to purchase them if you're up for printing yourself. Also, that's a nice option. And I personally think that the more grape juice or wine that is spilled on your Haggadah, the more meaningful your Haggadah is. A clean Haggadah is a sign of not a lively Seder. So I think the messier it is, the better.
Definitely. It's nice, like, to open up your Haggadah and be like, oh, I see the stains of 20 years ago in my Haggadah. Yes, we will share out the whole recording link tomorrow morning as well in the email. The Seder talks about 4 questions. Can we get 2 questions at least?
Where do you all source your horseradish?
If you just most grocery stores actually will carry horseradish. I've seen it at grocery stores here.
So it was at Albertsons yesterday. I suspect they'll have it at the Safeway on Barber Boulevard. Someone just tipped me to Uwajimaya, the Asian grocery store. So, and then when I say the Albertsons on Beaverton Hillsdale Highway in Southwest Portland, and the Safeway on Southwest Barber Boulevard, those 2 locations tend to have the most comprehensive Passover sections. If you're looking to do, your shopping all at once, but if you're just looking for a good box of matzah, on the other end, Trader Joe's has affordably priced matzah. So there's lots of things. And Costco even carries some kosher for Passover brisket and other things. If you're looking for that. And if you're looking not to cook the meal all yourself, I'm going to put a link in the chat. We have an article that was in our Jewish Review paper just yesterday that has a list of places where you can order some of your Passover items, because sometimes you want to focus on maybe preparing the content of your Seder versus preparing the food for your Seder, or a little bit of both. So I will share that here.
Great. And I will share one other thing that I've really enjoyed doing in previous years is making my own matzah. I just wrote a little article about it in the Jewish Review that I can link also in that email. It's nice to buy pre-made matzah, but for centuries after centuries, until the invention of machine matzah about 150 years ago, every family would make their own matzah. And it's like a really easy, fun thing to do. You can do it right before the Seder, so they're fresh. You could incorporate it into the Seder, right? It's supposed to happen under 18 minutes. It's supposed to be very fast. So it can be like a fun thing as your guests are arriving, you're making the matzah with them. And then like everyone has these matzahs that they themselves made that they're eating at the Seder, can add a level of beauty and meaning to it as well. Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming. If you, my email is yosef@jewishportland.org. If you have specific questions, feel free to email me. Or if this ended up enriching your Seder and you want to email me after your Seder and you're like, oh, that thing you mentioned, we did it and it was awesome. I would love to hear that, and be in touch. I'm been at the Federation now for a couple of months, since November, and doing a lot more communal education opportunities like this, trying to empower and offer wisdom and resources to Jews to do Jewish on their own terms, in their own homes, their own spaces, with their own communities. And so if you want more of this, stay in touch, and I'll be doing more things like this in the coming weeks and coming months.
Thanks
And
everybody for joining us. Have
Happy
a Chag
Passover.
Sameach, a happy Passover, and have a good rest of your evening.